Hey everyone, it's Austin Solomon, the Solomon Group at Coldwell Banker. Welcome to this week's episode of the Real Wausau Real Estate Show. Today I'm just doing a quick recap. I just had Kurt Moeller in, who's a local assessor for various municipalities in the Marathon County, Wood County, Clark and Shawano County areas. He does 15 or 18 municipalities that he is responsible for, and we just had a long podcast. It was about 50 minutes, and I was certainly it was certainly a lot of great information for me and filled in a lot of gaps for me. I just wanted to do a quick episode to kind of recap what I know about assessments, right? Some of the common misconceptions about assessments versus appraisals and market values, and some of the gaps that were filled in by the episode and just in talking with Kurt that wasn't on the air. So a couple of things. Again, remember, there's a difference between market value, assessed value, and appraised value, right? An appraisal is typically for the bank when they're financing a property, when they're lending on a property, right? They want to make sure that the home is worth at least what you're paying for it, right? So they send out an appraiser, just in a professional value, professional opinion of value. That's an appraiser for the bank when you're financing or refinancing, right? Market value is just a general term that says, hey, what would a normal buyer pay for the property given the market conditions and the time of year, right? That's something that an agent could prepare, like myself, a comparative market analysis, right? What's the market value? What's the home worth in the marketplace? And then the assessment or the assessor, right? It's similar to an appraiser in that it's an opinion of value, right? But it's for the purposes of the municipality, what the municipality and the township, right, the city, what do they value the property at, and how do they come up with that assessed value for tax purposes, right? A lot of times people get them mixed up. Now remember, in this marketplace, the market's been booming now for the last 2 to 3 years, right? Especially in the last year or so. And so it's very common for properties to sell for 1.5 times, 2 times in some instances, the assessed value. And so when you're looking at a property and it's listed at $250,000 and the assessed value is $175,000, right? You don't have to freak out and say, hey, this property's only worth $175,000, because it's not really a good indicator of the true value of that property, right? A lot of times those assessments were taken a long time ago. Maybe that person hasn't sold the house in a long time. The last time the assessor was in there, was 20 years ago, and it doesn't really reflect the current value of the property, right? Another thing that we talked about was, and this was great to hear, is if that property that was assessed at $175,000 and now sells for $250,000, as a buyer, do you have to worry that the new assessment is going to be $250,000? Well, like Kurt had said, no, it's not. That doesn't necessarily work that way, because how could that buyer who purchased that property for $250,000, how could his assessment be $250,000 when the neighbor next door, let's say their house is very similar, but they lived there for 50 years? It wouldn't be necessarily fair to assess that new buyer at $250,000, but then leave the neighbor's assessment the exact same just because they haven't sold it in a while. So like Kurt said, at its best, right, assessors, they're looking to they don't just chase properties, right? They're looking to get a good conglomerate, or a good conglomerate's not the right word, a good average of all the municipality, right? And kind of average and share that valuation for every property in that municipality, but they don't chase specific sales. So that was encouraging. Another thing is, in our area, like the Village of Cronenwetter, City of Wausau, Town of Rib Mountain, Village of Rothschild, in the last few years, all of these properties have gone through a citywide assessment, right? And for me, example, and I even kind of got this mixed up too, personally, is because I live in the Town of Rib Mountain. My property assessment went up about $55,000-$60,000 in 2019, and I was concerned because I set up a ratio. Here's what my current taxes are based off of this assessment. I know what the new assessment is, so then I can figure out what the new taxes are going to be, just like a ratio. I'm like, oh man, my taxes are going up like, $1,200 to $1,500. I was kind of like, that's a bummer. But it doesn't work that way, because like Kurt explained, if all the properties go up, right, essentially what property taxes are. It's a share. It's a share in the everyone is working towards paying the expenses or the budget of like the local schools, what the municipality needs, for fire, police, streets, all of these different things, all the services and amenities, water of a city, right? Each homeowner has to share in that based off of their, how much their property's worth, right? But obviously, if the assessed values go up on all of the properties, it doesn't necessarily mean, just like Kurt explained, that all the taxes are going to go up proportionately, right? So if your assessed value goes up 25%, your taxes aren't going to go up 25%, right? So if you got your reassessment and you're kind of waiting to see what your tax bill is, maybe take a deep breath, because it's not going to go up proportionately to what the assessment went up. Another thing that we talked about that was encouraging too, and I get this a lot, is when we're listing a property, right? Let's say that the homeowner, they have a basement and they started to do some finishing in a basement. And one of the questions I asked Kurt, it wasn't on the air, was what do you classify as finished? How do you classify it as being finished? Because a lot of times, maybe in a basement they have walls and a drop ceiling, but it's still concrete floors. Sometimes you have flooring and you have concrete walls and maybe more of like a spray painted ceiling. So what constitutes finished square feet? And obviously, like Kurt kind of shared, in my opinion, in it as well, there's no set standard in that, hey, if it has this, this, and this, it's considered finished. It's kind of a gray area, right? Now, on one hand, if you go down into a basement and let's say you have your eyes closed and you open them up and you can't tell if you're in the basement or the upper level, well, that's going to be, a high class finish. That's going to have drywall and a nice finish to it, right? That's on one side of the extreme, versus if you go into a completely unfinished basement and you see like unfinished walls, insulation, wiring, etc. Well, that's one side of the extreme, right? There's a whole array of different finishes that you can have and different types of finishes. Now, it's kind of a little bit of gray if what constitutes, when can you count it as a total finished square feet? Well, generally you do want to see like a flooring, ideally if you have like two of the three, like flooring, ceilings, or like a flooring and walls and maybe the ceiling is spray painted, it's a little bit of a gray area, right? When do you count it as being finished? So if something has like flooring, for example, and concrete walls, and then the ceiling is done, we'd probably consider that like a rec room finish. But the key is, as a buyer, it doesn't really matter. Like total square footage doesn't matter that much. They put so much weight on it on all the websites when they talk about price per square foot, etc. And as a buyer, you want to make sure you're getting a good deal. But the key is just look at what's there and just think about it for a moment and say, okay, what's really here? Do I have paneling on the walls? Obviously, paneling is really cheap. Or do I have nice drywall? Do I have a drop ceiling, or do I have a nice drywalled ceiling? It depends more on like what you really have. Do you have asbestos tile from 1950s as the floor covering, or do you have a nice, like in the basement, let's say you have a nice carpet with a nice pad and it's really cozy, right? It's more about like, hey, what quality of material is there, and what kind of vibe does it give off as to be considered finished. So those are just kind of a few things that we talked about. The last thing that I'll talk about as well is when you're calculating finished square feet on a property, a lot of times when you're looking at the assessor cards, you say, okay, let's say that a house has a foundation and the main level square footage is 1,000 square feet, the basement square footage is 1,000 square feet, and the upper level, it says it's 1,000 square feet too. Well, let's say it's a Cape Cod style home or 1.5 story, and so the roof line at your upper level, it starts on the sides or on the sides of your house and works up towards a peak. Then you can't count, and a lot of times agents get this mixed up too, but the upper level, even though it has the same footprint as the main, it's not considered all, you can't consider it all finished square feet. In general, the ceiling height has to be about 5. As far as like how we count it as agents, is the ceiling height has to be 5 feet in order to be considered like living space. But again, a lot of times we just defer to the assessor. So that's just one thing to keep in mind too. Like when you're figuring out the square footage, if you have like a 1.5-story style home, you can't count like finished square feet when the ceiling height is only, as it works down towards the edges, it's probably only, a few feet tall. Well, that's not really considered living space. So just kind of a couple things that's to kind of recap, filling in some of the gaps. So hopefully this episode is helpful, and you can kind of listen to this in conjunction to the longer episode that we just recorded.